Hey, Jonathan, welcome back to Vivid Virtual Days.
Hey Joe, how's it going?
Great, great. Well, it's been a great 2 days. We're heading into the final stretch here with RPA is one of the biggest talked about topics that I've heard on my podcast. Just curious to know your take on why. Why do you think RPA is such a hot topic right now?
Yeah, it is a very interesting one. I think the numbers that I showed in my presentation around just the pure increase in spend. I think that's the analyst community have definitely got something to do with this. Obviously, the acquisition of organisations like UiPath, Blue Prism, the big RPA names have obviously stirred up the industry. And I think partly where we're coming at it, and I think we part of the presentation that I did is marrying the shift left side of things, so the development tools and like we love the automation tool sets, and the operational capabilities. And interestingly, I think I had a chat about this today with some of the analyst community about the fact that actually there's only a few really big vendors that can truly support the right hand side. And if you think of operational estates, you've got people like IBM, which are obvious name, which don't have an RPA tool. They've got Watson and Blue Mix and all sorts of weird other things, but they're not entering the game. You got Microsoft again, not that interested in the RPA landscape. They've just recently renamed Flow to something, but they'll just integrate with whichever tool. And then you've got Micro Focus. You've got the COBOL estate. 90% of all transactions that happen in business today still in mainframe and COBOL. So they've got a distinct advantage of being able to look after that right hand side. And I think bringing in the RPA capabilities is perfect timing to actually see some realization. I think that's the challenge. RPA has been an operational excellence kind of capability, or maybe for the wrong reasons, for maybe cost saving a little bit. Whereas now we're seeing RPA used in a business context to remove some of these digital grind, some of these really boring PMO tasks, these you know with enterprise collaboration tools like Slack being around, people are communicating in different ways. I'm hoping to see, the ban all emails by 2020, but I think would be a bit too soon. But I remember watching a presentation from James Whitaker in Vegas, and this was about 5-10 years ago when he was at Microsoft. Before that, he was at Google and wrote the book on how Google test. But James had said, 10 years from now, there'll be no apps. And he demonstrated a platform which he literally said, okay, I'm going to change my next conference venue to the week after. And the back end, which was all the Project Oxford stuff, which is the cognitive services by Microsoft, kicked off, and they were negotiating different flights for him. They were, booking his hotel and his reward system, and there was no touch points. He just saw a new invite in his calendar to say it's all been confirmed. Yes, it was a good PR stunt, but at the same time, 10 years has gone past, and I think we're now at that point where some of those tasks and context switching and going between applications, there's no reason we should be doing it anymore. I think this is where RPA becomes BPA, business process automation, and we start seeing acceleration around that.
Jonathan, for some reason, some folks have a hard, they can't wrap their heads around RPA. They think it's just a buzzword. Like in a sentence, what is RPA and how's it different from functional automation?
There's very little difference to what we know and love in functional landscape. And I think, partly, we were used to this kind of UI driven automation for so many years. And, there was the pyramid, which I'm not going to talk about, but, that got kind of turned on its head. And the idea was, less focus on UI, more on API, and then, component, or let's call it database or messaging or whatever you want to call it, right? So that we saw people going down the pyramid, whereas operations actually started with the pyramid inverted anyway. So they started by looking at, tasks to increase, your size of your Exchange server mailbox, or you increase the database memory space, or the amount of memory allocated, or the hardware. That's how they were born. And there was very little on UI unless they really needed to. And I think partly is the fusion, a bit like when someone would talk about DevOps, and the idea of DevOps being blurring the line between development and operations. RPA is now the blurring the lines between test automation or functional automation and robotic process automation being literally automation in operations. So that's as simple as it is.
So, maybe people will just say I'm a bad automation engineer, but in 20 years, I've never had my test be very reliable over time. And now, like RPA, is it different? Is it more headless? And is it more reliable? Are we using more AI-based technologies that you mentioned, cognitive learning, to magically make it happen better than functional automation has been over the years?
I don't think there's any magic going on. It's interesting because obviously last week, we had the ADM virtual conference customer days, and they talked about the AI capabilities in UFT. This is something we've known about for quite a while, and they came at it with the use case of how do you understand the login process? It doesn't matter if you're logging into O365. Logging onto a PC is all pretty much the same kind of thing: a username, password, some kind of simple OAuth kind of 2.0 kind of API call, key cloak, whatever, right? Part of it is these are very simple activities which we've kind of overcomplicated for many years, right? And is there magic going on? And I've done this literally today. Part of it is talk about drinking your own champagne. I was sat there with the Micro Focus RPA tool, and I was trying to look at this mobile app, and I noticed if I log in as a user with the Android, and it's a React native app, the banner is at the top of the screen. If I log in as a iOS, it's at the bottom of the screen. So, at the end of the day, it's just a banner. And as far as my React.js component, it's called the same thing, which is UI control or something, right? So from an automation perspective, using a DOM, using an XPath or a regex or whatever we used to do fuzzy logic to identify the object, right? Using log, but with a star, so it got in or on. Part of it is it hasn't really changed, apart from you've taken it an abstract level above, which is instead of learning an object repository for an iOS and learning a different object repository for an Android, it's kind of saying, well, actually, let's not do that anymore. Let's understand what the actual components do from a business perspective. So, we're actually bringing in the domain context above it. And I've kept on kind of reiterating this point of the value of subject matter experts. It's not actually RPA or BPA isn't actually for us techie guys in the dev landscape or the ops side. That is actually for the business to be able to express their domain understanding of a particular system, whether it be a patenting system, whether it be a derivatives platform. There's a certain logic which those guys know. The difference is now we've got infinite more complexity. So like we've had Monte Carlo algorithms for a long time in the financial services kind of FS landscape. You put the same data in, you're going to get a different output every time. So now things get infinitely more complex with the machine learning, the natural language processing, so yes, all these new technologies are helping assist us, but this is really where I kind of said that 80-20 rule of 80% it might get a clarification and go down the right path. So if it's using Lewis or something from the linguistic platform from Microsoft Cognitive Services, it's going to get to a certain point where it breaks, and that 20% of the time it breaks. The question is, what do you do? Do you try and over-engineer the automation script, which is the temptation that we used to do, build a framework on top of it that deals with pop-up handling or error handling, or do we just look at augmenting that 20% off to actual people, humans who can understand things, right? Whether it be a caption, whether it be understanding a weird-looking error and actually fixing it or debugging it. Part of it is what the workforce is actually for. So let the automation take the 80%, pass on the 20%, and then don't utilize highly skilled engineers to exchange mailbox sizes and have to go through smacks or something to request an increase in your mailbox size. It should be you're in Slack, you're typing in Slack, I need more database storage, or I need more memory allocated to it. it understands the context between the language processing, and it automatically kicks off a task at the back, which is going to cost 0.2 of a compute more or storage cost, and it just does it. It doesn't require a SMART request. It doesn't require an authorization from your boss. That stuff's just automatically done, and businesses become autonomous in their ability to actually do operational capabilities, and then focus on the hard stuff for humans to get involved, and then you can augment that out.
Awesome, great advice. So, Jonathan, let me get to one of the questions here. They want to know, you mentioned the importance of process mining and shift right. Can you tell us more?
Sure. So this is probably, unfortunately, one of the small weaknesses of the current Micro Focus RPA tool. And it's actually because it's in its infancy, right? It's version 1.0. Even with 1.0, it's got some extremely capable capabilities already. Now, process mining is a process of automated business process discovery. So if you think about all the transactions that are happening and all the logging that's in the back end, part of it is you've got a footprint of what people are actually doing, whether that be them making requests or filling in forms on systems. Part of this process mining is actually harvesting that information using data mining algorithms, and then actually coming up with, well, actually, I've identified an improvement for a process. So, your boss turns around to you and says, every Tuesday, I need the figures for the financial, for the last week's financials. And you go off, you generate it, you do your power pivots, you get all the data you want, you send it, it's instantly out of date, it's all in Excel, it's all static information. And, part of it is it sees that his boss actually wants a cascading KPI using an exec scorecard kind of application, which can take the data straight from the source, can do the cascading KPI calculations and give you real-time information. Therefore, your task as a PMO or a report monkey in that particular area, or even a proxy, which is quite mean on that person because they're not actually adding value. All they're doing is, data mining data, which a computer can do. Part of it is it's removing those tasks. So there's tools like Disco, which I recommend to go and look at, and I could give you an example of something that I did this week actually. So I've been enjoying the UFT mobile local mobile capabilities, and I was kind of thinking, well, how do I isolate the traffic? So as doing a lot more around the security side of things, I fired up Wireshark, captured a PCAP file, and I had all the traffic that was coming down my network, which thankfully I'm not at secure government at the moment, so it's okay. So I captured all that information, and then I went straight into the load runner tool, and you can just import a PCAP file, point out the traffic that you want to identify, and it then will import all the associated request responses and all the chains of what made up that transaction, just by tracing through the interactions between, say, for instance, an app server and my local host, right? So suddenly I process mine just from my listening to my network. So if you think of products like NOM, which are obviously incredibly powerful in the IT ops perspective, you can take that information and actually reverse engineer it. And that's what I've been doing quite a lot recently, is using some of the security tools that some of the cyber reserve guys have been using for the government. So using things like Portswagger by Burp Suite, which is a great tool with on Kali or something. If you watch Mr. Robot, it'll all make complete sense. But you can actually just fire up a container, or even my Raspberry Pi with a poison ivy or whatever, just plug it directly into the network. I can sniff all the information what's going through there. And then I can also use it as a crawler, so it'll crawl through systems, it'll traverse directory structures and look for security vulnerabilities, but also it'll generate me a whole stack of data which I can use. So in the example of the retailers for doing performance testing, I wanted to be able to see what the performance was for every single page on the website. But if we take a massive website which went down, like Costco, right, and I wanted to check every single product on Costco, I can either go to them and say to them, give me your information from your CRM, ERP system, SKU information, whatever it is, and I'll then search for each one of those and look at your product page and see how well it performs and renders and DOM ready, etc. Or I can just literally use a crawler from Burp Suite, and it will go through and traverse the entire structure. It'll get all the product images, it'll give me all the references to the HTML, and then I can pass that over to Load Runner, and it will literally index each one of those pages. So there's lots of tools and techniques that actually allow you to take the shift right, and all these are free, and pull it to the left hand side. And what's the great thing, Performance Application Lifecycle, which was released in LoadRunner 9.5 or something back 10 years ago, did that. You could point it at JBoss log and it would reverse engineer all the logs to create you a load profile on the left hand side. And this is where, I'm definitely here to encourage the ITOM teams, product management teams, and the ADM teams to cross-solutionize. So start leveraging both sides to create real business transactions. And they could be for a particular use case. So let's call it GDPR for a second. Let's call it OPing. Let's call it whatever it may be. You can leverage information from the right-hand side and pull it to the left. I work with some guys called Probit who actually take from any APM, including the Micro Focus APM tools, they'll take that information and reverse engineer it into a business process model, which I can actually import into my tool and actually create UFT scripts from. So I'm actually using the APM tool on the right hand side. It doesn't matter if it's Splunk, App Dynamics, Dynatrace, it doesn't matter. I can take all this information on the right hand side. So everything's happening with Brexit or everything that's happening on Black Friday, and I can generate a model on the left hand side that is much more realistic than me manually creating scripts against potentially out of date requirements with not the level of coverage, which aren't real user journeys that are happening on the right hand side. So there's all these capabilities, but we need to get the product teams to start unlocking those capabilities and bring those product families together. So that's kind of my encouragement for the shift right and shift left community.
So really quick, they want to know, can you clarify the difference between business process automation and robotic process automation?
Sure. So I think I kind of partially covered it in that kind of, well, what's that level above? I'm going to call it shift up for a second, just for entertainment value, but that's pushing it up to the business, right? Forget the dark web for a second, but if you take unstructured data, so I reckon probably 90% of organizations have unstructured data that they really want to become structured so that they can create insight. So this was this kind of, well, where can it recommend improvements if I'm creating a financial tech platform or something else, right? So part of where business process reimagination is really about how do we take data from business applications, internal business applications, and expose them in a way that we can actually drive them. So think of SAP and SAP GUI. Part of where SAP GUI really added value was an API that allowed you to drive SAP. So it's that kind of technology. Is how do you utilize an API and not go through a UI?
Awesome. Jonathan, perfect timing. I might give folks 2 minutes before the roundtable. You'll be joining us there, so hopefully we'll get some more RPA questions in for you. Thanks again. Awesome. Cheers. See you soon.
See you soon.